Ross talk about something else. Alistair Strathern, this is extraordinary. He's Labour's candidate to replace Nadine Dorries in Bedfordshire. He's taken part in protests for Greenpeace. This gentleman dressed as a zombie outside the Home Office last year, and we've got pictures of him dressed as a zombie, and then we've got pictures. There he is. Oh, there he is again. And this is him campaigning as, in fact, a Labour candidate. Ross, in a world that seems to have gone barking mad, in my humble opinion, it's a bit embarrassing for the Labour Party, isn't it?
Well, we saw the nature of what Greenpeace were last week when they sort of invaded the Prime Minister's constituency home and climbed on the roof and so on. I mean, every member of the electorate has a right to stand for Parliament. But, I mean, if I were in Mid Bedfordshire, I certainly wouldn't be voting for this gentleman. And I think that those who do live there should seriously ask themselves if that's the sort of people that, you know, they want as a representative, somebody who sort of dresses up as a zombie and indulges in these sort of rather student protests. I mean, he's 33, for goodness sake.
Oh, he's that old, is he? He should be in the House of Lords at that
18 and 19-year-olds, but he's in his 30s. He should know better than that.
Natalie, I really want to ask you this question, right? Let's just... We're at separate ends of the spectrum, but debate is what this show is all about and what this station is all about. You are, you know, ex-leader of the Green Party, and I understand all that, but I want to talk about climate campaigners right now. You talked about it being pensioners or young people. I will maintain until I am blue in the face that whether or not their message is right or wrong, this is what I would say. The way they go about it, the way they protest, the way they disrupt, is not in any way getting your message through to people who perhaps want to know more about the message. They are being turned off because of the way they are going about their protest. How do you agree with that or not? Because it's not working, trust me, it isn't.
Well, I've seen non-violent direct action. I've seen those kind of protests have massive positive impacts over long periods of time. The obvious example of this is the suffragettes getting the vote for women. More recently, we saw anti-fracking protests. We saw tree protests in Sheffield that really changed the way things acted in our society when governments and local councils were refusing to listen. But what I would say is, I think we've seen lots of stories coming out of Mid Bedfordshire. What's overwhelming the feeling of the people of Mid Bedfordshire at the moment is they want an MP. They want Nadine Dorries to stand down as she said she's going to be standing down. They want someone to represent them that's holding surgeries, that's working for them, that's speaking in Parliament for them.
Absolutely, but my point is, Ross, if I can ask you, I mean, it's not my bag, but I'm sure we could do with more climate-aware people in politics, although I personally think that a lot of it's grandstanding and people will grab hold of that if they feel that it's popular. I don't believe that the way that certain climate protesters protest is doing that argument, that movement, any favours at all. Do you?
No, it's not doing them any favours. I mean, we could do with, I'll tell you what we could do with is more MPs with a scientific education. We hardly have any of them, and that's one reason why MPs in 2019 nodded through this whole net zero business. They thought it sounded, you know, vaguely virtuous to reduce their carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 without really ever thinking the consequences on the cost of living, and whether the technology actually existed. And, you know, this was sort of nodded through the House of Commons without even a vote. And it's astonishing, you know, one or two MPs raised sort of objections to it. One of them, Graham Stringer, one of the few, a Labour MP, one of the few MPs who actually has a scientific training, but others just sort of thought, oh, you know, well, I suppose we better go with this. It's extraordinary.
Ross, I agree. You're shaking your head, Natalie, but this is really interesting because Ross says we could have more MPs with the scientific education. I might respectfully suggest we could do more MPs who've actually got an education. I'm not saying there aren't issues about the climate. I just believe that the way people go about it, your average man and woman on the streets, the length and breadth of this country, not London-centric, not talking about Quentin in Knightsbridge, I'm talking about Mary and Berry, who I talk to about every single day. They, right, are trying to pay their mortgages and pay their gas bills. They're not interested in vegans. They're not interested in anything like that. All they see is a bunch of, whether young or old, unwashed people climbing on people's roofs or stopping people going to work to earn enough money to keep their heads above the water. That's the problem your movement, I feel, has got, Natalie. Final word from you.
Well, I'm going to start by agreeing with Ross about something. It's always good to find points of agreement, which I very much agree that there should be more people from a scientific background in politics. My first degree is agricultural science, and I find that an extremely useful thing on a regular basis. And, I can get up and talk about soil science, get up and talk about ecology in the House, as I do very often. But what we need is evidence-based policies, and we have a climate emergency. You look at what everyone can see around the world now, and thinking about Mary in Berry, her gas bill is so high, her energy bill is so high because she's reliant on fossil fuels. The cheapest energy we can possibly have now is onshore wind, which the government's still not going for.
What about nuclear? Oh, we could be here all night. Nuclear.
Well, the nuclear is not cheap. But, beyond the cheaper forms of energy, which is the renewables, the cleanest, greenest, best possible form of energy you can have is the energy you don't need to use.
Natalie, I could carry on.
Natalie, to insulate.
Natalie Green, Bennett even, an absolute pleasure. Ross Clark, thank you very much indeed. Sorry to cut you off. We have to move on. I'm very, very grateful for you being on.